Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Leslie Kernisan, board-certified geriatrician and founder of the website betterhealthwhileaging.net. And this is the Helping Older Parents video podcast, where I cover the best ways to support aging parents and other older loved ones so they can live better lives in their later years. I also often address common caregiving concerns and dilemmas, like what to do if you're worried about an older person's memory or safety, how to deal with Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia, and how to help your older loved one get the care they need. Today's episode is part of a series that I'm doing on age-related hearing loss, and I'm delighted to have audiologist Dr. Cliff Olson here to talk about options for treating age-related hearing loss when an older adult has Alzheimer's or another form of dementia. Dr. Cliff is the founder of Applied Hearing Solutions Clinic and also has a well-established YouTube channel, Dr. Cliff AUD, where he covers all kinds of things related to hearing loss and audiology. So, Dr. Cliff, thank you for being here to talk about this with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. Appreciate it.
Okay. So just for everyone listening, Dr. Cliff and I have done a few other episodes about treating age-related hearing loss, also called presbycusis, in older adults in general, and removing earwax. But I wanted to do this episode specifically about the situation that I'm approached about very, very often, which is families who have an older parent who is often much older, in their late 80s, maybe early 90s, and has some form of cognitive impairment, memory problems, thinking problems. They may or may not have a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or something like that. And the family usually is very aware that the older person is struggling with hearing loss. The older adult may or may not be very aware of it. Often people who have Alzheimer's or dementia are having difficulty understanding their various limitations. And so I would just love to hear about your experience in helping older adults who are in this particular situation, especially the ones who never have really had their hearing loss maybe treated all that much. Families have often heard that hearing loss makes dementia worse, so they really want to help. You know, they're hoping to sort of alter the trajectory of that dementia by treating the hearing loss. But we often find that they run into all kinds of difficulties getting treatment. Can you speak a little bit to this kind of situation?
Yeah, so, first and foremost, I understand the challenges that are associated with this, because you have someone who potentially has a combination of difficulties here. They have the Alzheimer's or dementia, and then they have a hearing loss on top of that, that's just compounding the communication difficulties that exist there. So anytime that it can be identified that there's a hearing loss, and hopefully still a treatable hearing loss for that individual, can kind of have some good effects here, even though the individual has already been diagnosed with either mild cognitive impairment, dementia, Alzheimer's, what have you, okay? So something that we even briefly touched on, I think, in the first time that we had a chance to touch base, is that sometimes you can actually see a positive change in an individual's cognitive function just by improving their ability to communicate by treating the underlying hearing loss. Now, that is easier said than done, and I'm sure we'll get into the different ways that you can go about getting that treated successfully. But it's important to understand that, like, even if you're at the point where someone maybe should have had their hearing loss treated a decade ago to try to slow down the rate of progression of the hearing loss, it doesn't mean that even though they've had that progression that you should not intervene right now. Okay, So a tree planted now is the second best thing, and the tree planted 100 years ago is the best scenario that you can have, right? But for right now, let's worry about getting the individual, your loved one, your older parent, let's get their hearing loss treated. Now, we know that if you get someone with hearing loss treated, that you can slow down the progression of their hearing loss. There's been several studies that have come out over the past couple of years that show us when someone is optimally treated with hearing aids, that progression can slow down. And so getting the hearing aids in their ears...
Sorry, are we talking about slowing the progression of the cognitive decline or of the hearing loss?
Sorry, yes, both, really. So we can actually slow down progression of comprehension when it comes to hearing decline, and we can slow down the rate of progression of cognitive decline as well. So now that we've... Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think that makes sense, because when people's hearing is better, they can socially interact much more. And we know that that's very nourishing, and not only a quality of life issue, but seems to help the brain perform better in the moment, and seems to slow decline in many cases as well. So that makes perfect sense.
Absolutely. And I see this regularly inside of the clinic. You have the children bring in their older parents. They're like, well, they've already been diagnosed with cognitive impairment to some capacity, but we also believe that there's some underlying hearing loss. So we identify, oh, yep, there's a hearing loss. We get them treated, and they come back over the course of their fitting sequence, and they're like, I feel like I kind of have more of my parent back here, like, because they had assumed that all of the communication difficulty was just like cognitively they just don't have the ability to communicate anymore, and that wasn't the case. So getting the treatment done can kind of bring back your loved one to some capacity. Now, not in all cases. In some cases, the advancement of the Alzheimer's or whatnot is so far gone that you can do anything to treat the hearing loss, and you're still going to have the same barriers to communication that you had before. But it's still, I would argue, a good idea if you're trying to slow down that progression.
Yeah, yeah. And it just improves, it makes so many things much easier, right? To be able to communicate with the person, to support them. It helps free up their cognitive bandwidth, because instead of like trying to decipher what somebody is saying, they can put it towards making the most of, what their brain is able to do. So yeah, definitely worthwhile. And, but then how do we go ahead and help them get effectively treated? Maybe you can take us through what you do to sort of support a person with Alzheimer's, both in like the evaluation and then like the hearing aids. Or treatment.
It depends on how advanced the deterioration is from a cognitive standpoint. Oftentimes, even some more advanced levels of impairment, we can take someone through an audiogram and have them function to the point where at least we have a foundational understanding of how much amplification we would need to provide if we did treat them with hearing aids. If they're not verbal anymore, if they're not able to actually repeat back words to us so we can identify their level of comprehension, then we might not know what the prognosis of success would be with hearing aids at the initial testing, but usually we can get enough reliable results to where we can make a recommendation for treatment.
Okay, so first they have to be able to, I guess, cooperate with the audiology evaluation and sort of follow instructions to tell you what they hear and don't hear.
That is correct. Just like a regular cognitively strong individual would have to do is go through a hearing evaluation. Now, there are things that we can do if someone is not capable of voluntarily going through a hearing evaluation. We have otoacoustic emissions that can be done. This is essentially a way that we can objectively test someone's cochlear function, so their hearing organ function, and identify, does this person have a hearing loss, and can we estimate what that hearing loss would be in different frequency ranges, and then use that information to program a set of hearing aids. So that would be the next best thing. So even if someone cannot volunteer a response to the beeps that we play for them, or volunteer repeating back words back, we do have avenues to go with for that.
Okay. And then what happens next? And maybe we can talk about mild to moderate hearing loss versus, severe profound.
Yeah. So mild to moderate hearing loss, and if we're also dealing with cognitive impairment to some degree, I would not recommend going with the options that you would have available to you, which is amplification, like just regular amplifiers and over-the-counter hearing aids. You're definitely going to want to make sure that the hearing loss, even at a mild to moderate level, is treated optimally as humanly possible for these individuals with a hearing care professional who follows comprehensive best practices in order to do so. But oftentimes, if we're in that mild to moderate hearing loss category, we have to identify the hearing aid that the patient is capable of using. That's the most important thing when it comes to cognitive impairment here. If someone is not able to take a device that goes behind their ear and have to work a dome inside of their ear canal at the same time, if they're not capable of doing that cognitively, then we can't really recommend a device that does that. We would need to maybe recommend a device that goes completely inside the ear canal, where it's easier for the person to self-insert. having things like rechargeable batteries inside of those hearing aids that they can easily just at the end of the day, they take them out, they put them on a stand, they take them off that stand fully charged in the morning, put them back in their ears. They're not having to fight with battery packages or have to remember that, oh, my battery only lasts 5 days. I've got to change it on the 5th day, or I've got to pay attention to a tone that's telling me that my battery's low to change the battery. No, like just have it to where you put it in the charger, take it out, you're done. So having a simple solution is more important than having a technologically advanced hearing aid that has a whole lot of complexity to it when it comes to individuals, even with a mild to moderate level hearing loss with cognitive impairment.
Okay. And then can you talk a little bit about the fitting and adjustment process? How does that go when people have, mild to moderate hearing loss and they have some Alzheimer's?
Yeah, so, and this is really true across the spectrum of hearing loss, but we have to, as a hearing care professional, I need to objectively know if I'm replacing the proper amount of sound inside of a patient's ear. And so if they have a mild to moderate hearing loss level and I fit them with a hearing aid and I don't make sure that I'm amplifying sound appropriately, the individual's not going to get the full benefit out of the hearing aid, meaning their communication status is not going to be as good. The rate of cognitive decline and hearing loss is going to continue on its declining trajectory at a faster pace than what we would want to see it decline. And both of those are, in my opinion, unacceptable when we can easily use a procedure called real ear verification or real ear measurement to verify that a patient is receiving the right amount of amplification. You also have to think about it from the perspective of someone with cognitive impairment. They are not going to be good reporters of what they're hearing and if they're getting the right amount of sound. So in a lot of cases, I can't necessarily trust what they tell me if things sound good. So I have to objectively measure it, make sure that they have auditory comfort, but that I'm actually getting them back the sound that they need in order to overcome their hearing loss.
Right. Okay. So do you find that this is still, I know in the other episode we did on like the process for helping people, properly get fitted for their hearing aids and adjust, and you sort of talked about how there are several visits. What kinds of adaptations do you need to make for people with dementia? And do you find that you're still able to get them to a point where they seem to be hearing noticeably better?
Yes. And so the modifications that happen here is that a hearing care professional, we have to rely more on the objective data logging that occurs inside of the hearing aids. And I'll give you a good example of this. So someone who does not have any cognitive impairment, they come in and they're like, hey, I wore my hearing aids from the time I woke up to the time I went to bed. That's going to be a good 15 hours or so that I wore my hearing aids each day since you fit me with these devices. You ask someone with a cognitive impairment, how often did you wear the hearing aids? They're going to be like, well, I think, I wore them. And it's like, did you wear them like 2 hours? Or did you wear them the minimum 8 hours that you need for optimal adaptation? We don't know. And sometimes even the significant other that's with them or the child that's with them is like, well, I'm there to check on them in the morning and they had the hearing aids on in the morning, but I don't know if they wore them all day, right? And so the data logging is incredibly important. The other modification is what I just alluded to, which is having someone there who's a support person, whether it's a caregiver, whether it's a child, whether it's the significant other, or even I've seen friends come in with these individuals to their appointments so they can report how the patient is actually doing with their treatment, because you get to the end of the fitting sequence where we've adapted the hearing aids to the patient and they've adapted to the amplification, and I'm taking them through a subjective outcome questionnaire. They're not going to be able to reliably report to me what their end performance is, but someone who's with them and can actually see what they were like beforehand and what they are after treatment, they are going to be able to identify the communication improvements and potentially the improvements in what they perceive to be cognitive improvements on the individual as well.
Yeah, it sounds like it's really valuable for the person to come to these visits with someone in their care circle, preferably who is observing them often in their kind of real world environment.
Absolutely.
To help you know what kind of adjustments need to be made. And then let's talk about like the severe, profound hearing loss, because again, often the families I'm working with have parents who, might be in their early 90s and maybe have had, hearing difficulties for quite a while. What happens there and what are the options for helping them?
Yeah, so a lot of the similar options. We might have to break out stronger hearing aids for these individuals because of a more severe hearing loss. It might take them a little bit more time to fully get used to wearing the hearing aids. Again, simplicity is the key here. We want a hearing aid that can go inside of their ears that they don't have to fumble a whole lot with. These individuals might even have someone who is a caregiver who has to be the person to insert the hearing aids into this patient's ears, and then at the end of the day, take the hearing aids back out of the patient's ears and do all of the maintenance for the individual. So having, again, support staff is incredibly important for this demographic. But someone who's made it this far, potentially without treatment to a severe to profound level, it can be more difficult to get that individual up to the hearing level that we really want to have them at. When you go potentially, if you're at a severe to profound level of hearing loss at an older age, you've probably gone through maybe even a couple of decades of auditory deprivation, and the progression of the hearing comprehension can degrade to the point where hearing aids actually provide limited benefit, where someone might have to go through cochlear implantation if they want to get more clarity back in their hearing. But you're not going to be able to go through cochlear implantation with, severe cognitive impairment or dementia or Alzheimer's. There's just no chance that a surgeon's going to do that on you, which means that you need to maximize as much as you possibly can with amplification, even if the outcomes are not as good. Now, one type of hearing aid that a lot of people don't really know about that they should, and this can be for anywhere from usually more of like a mild up to moderately severe, maybe severe if the patient has a good ear canal that cooperates with the hearing care professional, is called the lyric. So one of the biggest challenges of individuals who have Alzheimer's is when they don't have the wherewithal or capability to place the hearing aid inside of their ears on their own, and potentially not even have the wherewithal not to remove it because they feel something in their ear and they just
I was going to say, yeah, a lot of them, like, somebody helps them put it in and then they take it out, they drop it.
That's right. And it's a constant battle, like, no, Dad, you got to keep these in your ears.
Yeah,
and they don't get that, right?
Right.
And so the lyric device is the device that a hearing care professional will insert into the patient's ear canal to the point where you can't even see it. You couldn't try to fish it out with your fingers if you wanted to. Okay. And it stays there for about 6 to 8 weeks at a time. It's adjusted by the hearing care professional, so you leave it at the same level the entire time. And then the patient comes back in every 6 to 8 weeks. We pull out the old one, we put in the new one, you're good to go. And then the patient has consistent hearing. They can sleep in it, they can bathe in it, they can't skydive or scuba dive while wearing it, but I highly doubt they're going to be doing that stuff anyway. But it's a great way that a lot of people don't realize that you can actually get your significant other or your loved one to have consistent hearing ability without having to deal with all the headaches of the in and out of the ears and maintenance and cleaning and charging and battery changes and all of that. You can just have a hearing aid that consistently works day in, day out.
Yeah, no, that's a good option for people to know about, because my personal experience has been that I've seen lots of families just spend a lot of time struggling to try to find a hearing aid solution, and ultimately it seems to fail for a variety of reasons. But, and often the older person is kind of resisting it and not cooperating, and maybe they are also not well adjusted so that when they're in there, they're not getting the right hearing support. Or maybe we can talk actually a little bit about the adaptation process, because we did talk about that in another episode. But what we're generally told, at least in medicine, is that hearing aids take a while to adjust to. It's not like glasses, like you put them on and you see clearly right away. The brain has to adjust to them. And of course, the difficulty, a brain with Alzheimer's is by definition working with damaged neurons that are having difficulty learning and adjusting. Right. So can you speak to how that adjustment process works in general, and how you see it working when it comes to people who have Alzheimer's or another dementia?
Yeah, so typically for an individual who's treating their hearing loss with no cognitive impairment, it's 30 days. 30 days is that window that we track an individual. We expect almost all other adaptation to occur within that 30 days. There are diminishing returns after that 30 days where it's not going to get significantly better from a treatment outcome perspective and getting comfortable with the hearing aid perspective. Now, to some degree, all bets are off when it comes down to cognitive impairment. You can have individuals potentially fully adapt to their hearing treatment inside of that same 30 days, and other individuals, it appears that they need to go longer than 30 days for that adaptation. But at the end of the day, we're never able to completely parse out what percentage of this lack of adapting to the hearing treatment is the hearing loss and what percentage of it is the cognitive impairment. Okay, so this is where doing the objective measures inside of the clinic is so critical. I really can't stress this enough, but we can't rely on any reporting from the patient. We can rely on reporting from the significant other or companion that's with the individual. But even their reporting isn't going to tell us if this individual is getting the right amount of sound. So we have to run objective measures like the verification measures that we would do at the initial fitting. And if we had to make any significant changes to the amplification or programming, we have to rerun the verification measures so we can know at the end of the day what the patient was able to tolerate from an amplification standpoint. And once we get them to their highest level of tolerance of the amplification to where it's comfortable for them and it's not overpowering for them, then we know that after that 30 to 60 day window that we likely have an individual with dementia at the highest capacity that we're going to be able to get them to.
Yeah, yeah. And I just want to highlight, because this was something I learned from you, in the previous episode, that the adaptation you had told me is partly that initially when people's hearing is corrected, it's just so much input that it's overwhelming for the brain, right? And that you sort of start them off at like lower amplification so that the brain can get used to this additional input. Right. And maybe you can share again what you had said about the auditory cortex having to adapt to it.
Yeah. So anytime someone has a hearing loss, what happens is the auditory cortex, which is used to process sound information, it's right above the ears. You have it in both hemispheres of your brain, so it's easy to remember. But typically, those auditory cortexes would actually process auditory information from the ear. But when you have lack of input coming up from the ear, now the other areas of your brain have to compensate for that. And so you end up getting part of your frontal cortex, trying to fill in missing gaps of what you're not hearing. And you end up, over the course of time, you end up adapting to relying on other areas of your brain. This is why we believe that individuals with untreated hearing loss have accelerated rates of cognitive decline, because they're using cognitive resources on their hearing ability that they should not be using those cognitive resources for. The good news is that we can actually shift that processing back into the auditory cortex with proper hearing treatment. And that is why it takes around that 30-day window. And they have studies on this with fMRI data showing that when you treat someone with hearing aids, it starts to migrate that processing back into the auditory cortex, where when they look at it, when they present you with sound information, the auditory cortex is what lights up in those fMRI studies. So it's definitely, I think a lot of people think that hearing loss is an ear issue. Hearing loss is not an ear issue. Yes, there are structural changes that happen in the ear to give you a hearing loss, but we hear with our brains. And so we just have to make sure that we're getting our brains the information and let our brains work with that information. And whatever we can shift back into the auditory cortex is a positive for whether you have dementia or whether you do not have dementia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks so much for explaining that. And then you did mention earlier that sometimes if people have had hearing loss for many decades, right, they're at a severe, profound level, that auditory cortex may have just so declined, right?
Yep.
And then especially we're talking about people who are 90 and also have Alzheimer's symptoms. If you have symptoms, you have actually been experiencing in your brain the changes of Alzheimer's generally for about 20 years. Now we know that the changes start 20 years before symptoms do. So there's been like a lot of change in there. And so I think you said that there are some people where it's kind of not recoverable.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. So the specific test that I'm talking about is called your word recognition score. This will appear on your audiogram. Individuals, and I don't care what severity of hearing loss you have. You can have a mild hearing loss, you can have a profound level hearing loss, and you can have a different speech score or a word recognition score that we calculate. If you have 100%, what that means is that you're able to, when sound is replaced back to your brain, overcoming the hearing loss with amplification, then you're able to comprehend 100% of the speech information still. However, if let's say you have a 20% score, what that means is that if we amplify sound for you and treat your hearing loss perfectly, you're going to comprehend about 20% of the sound that you hear. And that's not very good, okay? But 20% is better than 0%. So if you're someone who's gone years and decades without treating your hearing loss, and the result of that is these percentages that don't go back up, by the way, but if they degrade further and further and further, and back in your 20s you heard it 100%, and now in your 80s you hear it 20%, that's your prognosis for success with hearing treatment is 20%. And so this is why I encourage people that you want to be treating your hearing loss as soon as humanly possible, because the X's and the O's, so the audibility of sound, that will continue to degrade whether you treat your hearing loss or whether you don't treat your hearing loss. But your ability to comprehend what you hear once you restore access to that missing sound, typically with hearing aids, that can degrade over time faster. So the advice that I would have coming out of this is that not just from the trying to stave off cognitive decline, but if you're trying to actually have a high-level treatment outcome with hearing aids in particular, you want to treat that hearing loss as soon as you possibly can.
Right, right. Well, often families are stepping in to help an older person who has not done the many things that they wish they had done for their health. You know, they're often saying, and they didn't exercise and they didn't go to the doctor soon enough. So well, they do have to, live with the fact that they're trying to compensate for a person's choices. So hearing aids are expensive. Getting audiology care, we mentioned in the related episode that the initial evaluation is covered by Medicare, but not the treatment, not the fittings. So it's a fair investment. How do families know whether they're likely to get a good outcome and it's worth pursuing that investment? Because I feel like that comes up for people too.
Yeah. Well, first off, I always recommend you start off, get the test. Even if you're not committed to I'm going to do something with these results. If they show a hearing loss, get the test. Because you do not know. I promise you, I have a hearing loss in my right ear. They identified it when I was 19 years old. I would have swore up and down that I did not have a hearing loss. And here I have a pretty significant hearing loss in the mid frequencies of my right ear. Blew my mind, right? So people are walking around with hearing losses that are measurable hearing losses. So I would say, if nothing else, go in and get the testing done. The hearing care professional that you work with, at the end of that test, they will say yes or no in terms of, are you a candidate or are you not a candidate for hearing aids? If you're a candidate and you want to continue on with that discussion to learn more about what your options are, by all means, continue on with that. They will eventually get to the point where here's what the investment to treat your hearing loss would be. And then if that's your initial introduction into how expensive hearing aids are, then go back and figure out, is that something that I can work with or is it something that I cannot work with? If it's something that you cannot afford, you have options. You can go through charitable organizations to get hearing treatment on either for free or on a sliding scale based on your income level. You can go to places like Costco. If you're dealing with cognitive impairment, that's a tricky thing. You have to make sure that your hearing loss is treated well if there's cognitive impairment involved. And if you have a clinician who doesn't understand the nuances of working with that, then you have to be cautious about who you go to at Costco, because it's more about the professional than it is the location. But you need to make sure that you share what your cost limitations are. If you know that you're going to an excellent hearing care professional who follows best practices and you know that they would do a really optimal job of treating your hearing loss, tell them what your budget is. And then if they have an option that can work within your budget, I promise you they will work with you. Okay?
Right.
Like not every clinic is no, it's either you spend the $8,000 or nothing. Tell me what you can work with, and I'm going to see if I can find a hearing aid and a care plan that works for you within your budget. But here's what I would say to that. Hearing is vitally important for communication, and it's even more important when you start having cognition play a role in all of this stuff. You have got to find a really good hearing care professional, and if it costs you a little bit more money or even a lot more money to go to someone who's really good at treating you, that is where you want to go. Otherwise, you end up going to waste thousands of dollars on a treatment that doesn't work anyway, and you might as well have taken that money and invested it into a better level treatment.
Right, right. And so it sounds like there are options, especially for mild to moderate and maybe a little bit more than that. And then maybe if it's like really severe, profound, maybe asking some additional questions about, you said the word recognition score,
Yeah.
might help know sort of like how much of an improvement you're likely to get. And then also being mindful, like what are the person's capabilities for manipulating them. You did mention the lyric that gets like put in and stays for 6 to 8 weeks. What does that cost relative to other hearing aids?
You'll spend more on that treatment option. It's because you have so many touch points with the hearing care professional. Minimal, you're going to have 6 touch points with them where you come in 6 times over the course of the year. And then each time those devices get removed, they get thrown away. So here's what I typically tell people. Over the course of around a 4-year treatment window, if you go the traditional hearing aid route, and then you compare that to the lyric route, you'll probably spend about 3 to 4 times more money on the lyric route than what you would the traditional hearing aid route. And it's because you have so many devices that you go through and you have so many touch points with the hearing care professional. But if that's the only thing, right? If that's the only thing that you can do for someone, is to have that highly specialized, because I'm in Phoenix, there's like 7 clinics that do that treatment in Phoenix. We're one of them. There's hundreds of clinics in the greater Phoenix area, hundreds. And there's 7 of us that do this highly specialized treatment. So it's going to cost more, but if that's the only option you have, you need to try to figure out a way to make it work, hopefully.
Yeah, yeah. But on the flip side, it costs more, but you're not dealing with it every day.
Totally.
The way many families are dealing with it every day, trying to get them in, get them out, get them charged. Do you have a tip or recommendation to help people not lose them? I hear a certain number of like, they lost one, they dropped one, where did it go? There's a certain amount of like looking for the hearing aid. Any tips there to help families with that?
Yeah, there's fun and exciting ways to locate lost hearing aids, and then there's kind of like the boring way of making sure they don't get lost at all. There's products out there. One of them is called Ear Gear, and essentially these are sleeves that you can slide over the top of a hearing aid or a clip that you can have a wire clip that clips onto your collar and then clips onto the hearing aid. So if the hearing aid gets knocked off or something like that, it's just dangling by that safety cord, basically.
Or if they pull it out because they're not sure, what is that thing in my ear?
Right. It's just you come home and you visit Dad, and it's like, oh, Dad, what the heck's going on? Your hearing aids, instead of being lost somewhere who knows where, they're just dangling there. So that's one way to do it. You actually have a company called Deaf Metal, so DEAF, like deaf hearing, metal. And these are like really designer type little sleeves they're silicone sleeves that you attach to the hearing aid. And then it's actually an earring that actually goes down and attaches to the person, or there's a clip that goes on their ear. It's much more fashionable than having a clip that goes down to your collar. So that's a great way to prevent loss of hearing aids. But the fun thing is, if you do lose a hearing aid, most of the hearing aids nowadays that have Bluetooth connectivity with the smartphone, you can go into the smartphone and it will tell you where the last known location of that hearing aid was. And then you can actually take that smart device and go into the vicinity of where it was, and it'll give you like you're near or far away from that device using the Bluetooth strength. So you can locate lost hearing aids. And then worst case scenario is you're not able to locate the lost hearing aid. Every new hearing aid comes usually with anywhere between a 1 and 3 year loss and damage warranty. So if you lose a hearing aid and you cannot find it, you can file a claim through your hearing care professional with the hearing aid manufacturer at a fraction of the cost, and they will replace the hearing aid for you if it was lost. You can only do that 1 time per hearing aid, so try not to lose the same hearing aid twice. And then if you do, you can apply for additional third-party insurance. There's a company called ESCO. You can go on esco.com right now and essentially purchase an extended loss and damage plan to where if you lose another hearing aid, it will still be covered, and hearing care professionals across the United States typically work with that plan.
Okay, great. And then I know you said that, hearing when there's cognitive impairment is so important that you recommend people go like to hearing aids, the best type of product. But if they don't want to go that route because it's expensive, can you talk about a few of the like alternative options? So for instance, in geriatrics, we do often use pocket talkers. I have one in my geriatrician bag for when I would go see people in nursing homes or assisted living, because often they're hard of hearing, put it on. That's just amplification. right in there. It tends to help. Any other sort of like simple hacks that people might want to consider if they're not able to go the full hearing aid route yet?
Yeah, pocket talkers are really like the go-to for like on the fly like that. There are cases where we have patients come into the clinic who you can tell like you just can't communicate with them at all. So we have the benefit of taking stock hearing aids or loaner hearing aids and just doing a quick little uploading of amplification and pop them in their ears so they can at least function to some degree. But of course, not everybody's going to have that capability. You can use things. So like one of the big complaints for someone with more significant hearing loss is that the TV volume is so loud that it like rattles the walls and wakes the neighbors. So getting someone a pair of TV ears or headphones that are wireless from the TV so they can listen to the volume at whatever level that they want to hear and understand the TV, that's an excellent option. I will say that there's also an additional option for the Pocket Talker, which is pretty fun, the version 2.0, that you can actually plug in a remote microphone to the bottom of it with a really long cord, and someone can literally talk directly into that microphone and send the sound into the individual with hearing loss's ears, which is a really good option as well. But those are like the minimalist things that you can do. Outside of that, even getting the lowest tier technology at a hearing aid manufacturer of a prescription hearing aid can do a pretty good job for individuals as long as it's programmed well and you don't have to massively break the bank to do it.
Okay, great. Well, this has been so helpful, Dr. Cliff. And so it sounds like, a recurring theme in our conversations has been the importance of working with a good hearing care professional who can really make sure that the hearing aids are properly fitted and adjusted to meet an older person's needs, that it should be possible to do this in many circumstances, even for somebody who has Alzheimer's or another form of dementia. And so can you talk a little bit about where people can find such professionals? I know you've been involved in trying to connect people with those professionals.
Yeah, absolutely. So the thing that you're really looking for is a hearing care professional who follows comprehensive audiologic best practices. There are a ton of best practices that are out there. And, some clinicians will pick and choose a few to use and then not use the rest of them. And those are for individuals who typically end up not wanting to use their hearing aids because they just don't find significant benefit. So the easiest way that I have found to find a hearing care professional who follows comprehensive best practices is by going to my website, hearingup.com. And the reason that is because back in 2017, when I started the channel, my YouTube channel, creating information about these best practices, I got patients calling me all the time saying, hey, where do I go to find someone who does all these things that you talk about? And I'm like, well, I have no clue. I guess you'll just have to call every clinic and ask them about 50 questions about all these best practices to see if they do them or not. So instead of that, I created a vetting program where these Hearing Up Network members go through an actual vetting process with me, and then at the end of it, I either approve them or I do not approve them. And if they get approved, they get listed on my nationwide network. We have about 200 of them in the network right now. So if you want an easy way to find a hearing care professional who follows comprehensive best practices, go to hearingup.com. If you want to find someone who's not in the network, you still need to find someone who follows best practices. I have a printout of all of these best practices on the hearingup.com website. So if you want to find your own professional, go right ahead. Either way, I just want to make sure people can hear their absolute best.
Right. And one takeaway that I have is you mentioned that that only 30% of the hearing care professionals do the real ear measurements. So that's one thing that they can ask.
Because that's the only way that we know that a patient's receiving the right amount of amplification with their devices. And those patients have higher preference for their hearing aids, have higher satisfaction rates, and they have better hearing outcomes at the same time. So that is the one non-negotiable when it comes to treating your hearing loss with hearing aids that you absolutely have to make sure your provider is doing.
Okay, great. Well, thank you once again, Dr. Cliff. I'm sure that this information will help lots of families get their loved one who has Alzheimer's or dementia or cognitive impairment better care for their hearing loss. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for everything you are doing for your older loved one. If you'd like to learn more from me or even get my guidance with your caregiving situation, be sure to take a look at the description for this video. There will be a link to a page where you can learn more. I also hope you'll subscribe to this channel. That's another great way to stay connected. So thank you again, and I look forward to seeing you all again on a future episode of the Helping Older Parents video podcast.